I'll provide some framing and some overview comments to the topic of a fine balance, evaluation, monitoring, independence and collaboration. And then I'll pass over to Maeso and Drew, who will present their program-specific examples of the topic. We'll all be making reference to the situation where there's separate evaluation teams sitting side by side, implementation teams. And Maeso comes from the program implementation side of things, and Drew comes from the evaluation side of things. I think it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm not sure we'll agree with each other completely, but hopefully that makes for an interesting discussion. So I think rather than a question about a balance today, I think the real question behind the topic is how to ensure quality monitoring and evaluation for program effectiveness. So that's what I'd sort of like to talk to. And I think we've heard a little bit about the politics of evidence and sort of the drivers for an increased interest in evaluation this morning. And I think this has been the quality issues have been one of the key drivers for setting up these independent evaluation teams. So as part of today's preparation for today's discussion, I thought that it would be interesting to go and look at how many of these evaluation teams has DFID set up. And we'll all talk to about DFID today because DFID has really been the leader in this area, although there are some donors that have been following and setting up similar arrangements. So DFID, as Stephen said this morning, DFID's got increasingly sort of more interested in evaluation and particular types of evaluation. From about 2011, it started asking more questions about what works, and it also delegated responsibility for commissioning evaluations to the spending units rather than coming from the evaluation department. In 2013, DFID also released a new evaluation policy, and that spoke to independent evaluations. It recognised that there was a range of other types of evaluations, but specifically sort of focused on independent evaluations. So I went to the UK government procurement website. That was exciting stuff. And I started looking at the number of evaluation tenders that had been released since almost the beginning of last year. Some of the information's been archived, so it's a bit harder to go back and find out what's happening before that. There was about 35 program-specific evaluation tenders. I didn't count about how many actual tenders there were for program implementation. Of these, there was about 50% that were for contracts of 3 years or more. So I took this as an indication of a side-by-side sort of ongoing relationship with an implementation team. The average length of the contracts was about 4 years, with maximum, I think there was one for 9 years, one 11 years. So this is sort of the post-implementation phase as well. The average contract value was about £1 million, and there was quite a wide range though, from £150,000 right up to £4 million. So some possibly not very much money, and then some a lot of money. I then sort of thought, okay, well there's these evaluation teams being set up. What are the evaluation teams responsible for as opposed to what are the implementation teams responsible for? And what I saw was that the evaluation teams are responsible for a broad range of services. They weren't all consistent, but process evaluations, impact evaluations, performance evaluations, learning, internal, external, reviewing theories of change, revising theories of change, verification of monitoring data. So that's sort of like, okay, that's a lot. What's the implementation team doing? Monitoring data for the log frames and reporting against the log frames. And so I sort of thought, okay, balance, let's see. So with that in sort of mind, I'd like to make sort of two calls to action. And I think this does sort of feed off some of the discussion this morning. Firstly, I think that there needs to be consideration of the range of quality issues. Independence is one strategy for increasing the quality of evaluations. It's not the only strategy. And there's other things that affect the quality of evaluations, like the technical competence, ethics, transparency, usefulness, relevance, etc. And so independence needs to be put into that mix about how we best trying to achieve quality monitoring and evaluation. And I think we need to also sort of look at, well, what's the purpose of independence if we are sort of going down for independent teams? Is it around the perception of credibility? Is it to have a fresh pair of eyes on a program? Is it to counter unintentional or even deliberate biases by the implementation team and the information that they're producing? I think there seems to be sort of an implicit message sometimes when talking about independence is that programs are out there to deliberately manipulate the results data. Okay, and I think we do sort of need to question that a little. And I think then we also need to sort of think about, well, how does context affect independence? Is the primary purpose of the evaluation for accountability or learning? If it's for accountability, then perhaps more independence might be beneficial. If it's for learning, then perhaps less independence. And some of this comes from my thinking. I read a number of years ago that the people that learn the most from evaluations are the people that do it. So if we're wanting implementation teams to learn, then shouldn't they somehow be involved? Okay, so I think that's important. The other thing is also to look at the evaluative capacity of the implementation team. And by evaluative capacity, I mean their capacity, their skills, their knowledge, their attitude around self-reflection, self-examination, looking at data and learning from that data. If that's high, then do you need a high level of independence? If it's low, and let's be honest, some programs, the evaluative capacity is low, then perhaps a greater level of independence in the evaluation is a good thing. Okay, so it's not sort of simply that all independence is good. The other thing that I want to talk about and make a call for action is around the balance of roles and responsibilities. So I talked before about that a lot of responsibilities have been given to these external teams. And I think some of this comes down to also a traditional definition of monitoring versus evaluation. And there's been, some evaluators talking about M, little e, and big E. Well, some of that little e needs to, I think, move, be placed within implementation teams. And certainly Drew and Mayoso will talk about programs that are implementing the DCD results measurement standard and incorporating that little e into what they're sort of like doing as well. So I think need to look at that. And also valuing a broader range of evaluative activities. So the DFID policy gives an emphasis to independent evaluation, and I think there are other types of evaluation, and of course we've also seen a very large increase in the number of impact evaluations. But impact is one of the things that can be evaluated, but not the only thing. And then with that there's still more work to be done, I think, for developing evaluative cultures within implementation teams. Okay, so on that note, I'd like to pass over to Mayoso. And Mayoso's from MAID Ghana, and as I said before, he comes from the implementation team and will share his experiences about working with an independent evaluation team.
Thank you, Donna, for setting the platform for me. I'm sure she's already given enough background to what I'm going to discuss. I think building from what we have learned this morning in the last session that we had, I think there was a lot of discussion on the need for evidence, the need for interaction, the need for collaboration, who is responsible for this evidence, how is this evidence supposed to be shared, or who owns this evidence. So all these kind of discussions, I think, are giving us another platform to which we can discuss about how we can relate in this process between the donor, the program implementers, but also the evaluators. What I'm going to discuss with you now is some of the experiences, but I'll focus more on the implementers side of view, because as she has lightly said, I am an M&D manager responsible for GhanaMed. GhanaMed is a Deaf ID program that is being implemented in the northern Ghana and is working in 4 markets: groundnuts, rice, onions, and other vegetables. So we have an MRM component to the program, but we also have external evaluators. So most of my discussion is going to center around some of the experiences, but also highlight a few elements which we believe would be useful for maintaining collaboration, involvement, engagement, but also continued participation of the evaluation with the program team. Maybe a bit of some reflection. Donna, I think, has highlighted what we mean by external evaluators. I'm sure by this time everyone has a background what these evaluators are. Mostly are engaged by the donor to provide a different lens to the program. And most especially to, like, for example, in the program that I'm working with, they're supposed to provide some support or some different eye to our M&D system, because we are constantly collecting information, and this information is used for reporting to our donor. So basically, building on the discussion in the morning, you notice that the evaluators maybe might take a different approach, or they might use different methodologies to ascertaining some of the results. So my discussion this time is just to shape or to bring a discussion on how this relationship can shape to achieve the expected objectives. Before maybe I continue with my discussion, I just want you to reflect on how this relationship can be enhanced. How do we reconcile the need for evaluators to be independent? At the same time, the evaluators are also supposed to be involved with the program. When I talk about involvement, I mean evaluators in this case are not supposed to be seen like an isolated entity, but they are supposed to be seen as part of the program, because their involvement to the program is not only to be accountable to the donor or to be able to check or to police the program rather, but they are supposed to be part and parcel of the program process. I would give you an example of how these evaluators are engaged. Donna has said that these evaluators are engaged. They should be looked in different contexts, but also in different programs. In our case, the evaluators were engaged from as early as the project started. But you might agree with me that in other programs, like in the program that I previously worked in, the evaluators were introduced later in the project. So you would see that the way the program team would view the evaluators at that stage versus the way they would view them from the initial phase of the project would be different. I think we might discuss this maybe later in the broad context. But what I want to highlight here is some of the elements that are so significant to consider in this type of relationship. One of the key components is communication. There is need for programs to communicate with the evaluators most of the times, or in all times. Another element is the continuous engagement. The evaluators should not consider themselves like some isolated block, but they should always constantly engage with the program. When I mean the program, I'm not only referring to the M&D component, but I'm looking at the program as a whole unit. But the other element that also might be useful for maintaining this balance or for a successful collaboration and independence is the sharing, where you need to share information, where you need to constantly be in touch with the program, and there is need for continuous continuous interfacing between the program and the evaluators. That's just an example of how our program has been interfacing with our evaluators. On an annual basis, we do have theory of change review sessions. Maybe I should also mention from the start that our program engaged with the evaluators from the onset by developing the theory of change, but also annually we do these reviews just to reflect on how the theory of change is shaping in our program, which also helps the program try to really look at some of the interventions and going forward to plan on how they are going to achieve their program. So that's just a picture. Fortunately, one of our evaluators is also here. I didn't expect him to be here. So our team leader also seated at the back. He's on the picture. So this is just one of the sessions that we had this year. Some of the parameters, I've already highlighted some of them. Some of the parameters that would enhance this reconciliation between the evaluator and the program. This might not be happening effectively, but at least it is an attempt towards shaping that kind of collaboration, towards shaping that kind of independence, because there is always continuous engagement. So there has to be a bit of some transparency. There has to be information sharing and communication. I've already highlighted this, but I'm not just giving examples on how this can happen. Like in our case, our M&D team and the evaluators, we are constantly sharing information in terms of reports. Because we are doing data collection, when we are developing even the tools, we share them with the evaluation team for them to look at the tools and they provide feedback. Similarly, when they are doing their own qualitative assessments, they share the tools as well to input into the process. The idea is not to make them like part of the M&D team, but the idea is to ensure that whatever information is being collected is useful to the program, but also is useful to their evaluation process. Even the methodology, even the synchronization of plans, like when they have planned for the year, for example, on how they're going to collect their information, we need to at least know how they're going to do it, where they're going to be collecting that information, for example. We also sometimes discuss on how our own methodology of data collection is happening. This is also important because if you refer to the morning discussion, you notice that there were a bit of some gap between the donor, the evaluator, and the program in terms of methodology. But we're trying at least to bring that into reflection in terms of how we intend to do our data collection as an ongoing process, but also them trying to give some advice on how this can happen. So others would say, but why collaborate with an external evaluator? After all, these are contracted by the donor. Well, why do you give a fuss to collaborate with them? We think this is useful because at the end of the day, if the evaluator provides a report for example, to the donor, this is supposed to provide some credibility, but also validate some of the information that the partner is collecting. So if there wasn't any interface, if their process was being done in isolation, there wouldn't be such credibility, but also the accountability element is going to be a bit compromised. So those are just some of the examples on how this collaboration can be enhanced, where we're saying there has to be more triangulation of the data that is being reported. For example, if there is monitoring going on, or if you're doing any baselines. Like in our case, we do share our database, for example, with the evaluation team when they request it, or when we do collect information, when we have submitted reports, we also share with them so that they can have access. There The other example I think would be maybe the DCD audit. I don't know how many programs here have undergone DCD audit, by show of hands. All right, some are yet to be audited. But through the DCD audit, some of the recommendations that are made from that process are also useful to the program. Like we've recently been pre-audited, and a lot of recommendations have been drawn from there, which is going to be useful to our own M&D system. Why am I talking about the pre-audit? It's because this was a deliverable for the for the evaluation team. But at the end of the day, whatever is coming from the pre-audit is going to be useful to our program. So just to emphasize that there is need to keep this relationship going. There is need to interface all the time, and as you can see in this kind of setup, you have the donor on the other end, you have the evaluation team, you have the program team. These are interfacing constantly, and they shouldn't operate in isolation. Some of the elements that we need to consider are the ones that I've already highlighted. I was just trying to emphasize on the point that we need to maintain this independence, but at the same time, we should get involved in terms of how we are implementing our program. There is need to be more flexibility in terms of our interventions. There is need for learning in terms of how, in terms of the designs and the methodologies that are used by the program, but also from what the evaluation team uses in their approach. In brief, that's what I wanted to share with you. I know there is a lot of discussion. I know most of the programs have interfaced with evaluators in a different way, in a different context, in a different methodology. But this is just one example that we wanted to highlight. Other programs might also have different experiences, because donors like DFID, they do not have a generic approach. They do not have generic terms of reference for evaluators. Programs are given evaluators with different terms of reference. But it depends on how you're going to shape your relationship to maintain this kind of independence, but also collaboration. Drew is also going to share some from the evaluator's perspective. But should you require further information or any engagement, those are my contacts. We also have a website for our program, which you can visit for more information in relation to our program. Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah, so my name is Drew Caleras. I work at Palladium in the Research, Monitoring, and Evaluation unit. And we wear two hats in that unit. We set up all of the internal monitoring and evaluation for all of Palladium's programs, so on Mayosa's side of the fence. And we also do external evaluations as well. So I'll be presenting on the latter today. And just wanted to talk a little bit, starting off with the dual purposes of monitoring and evaluation in a world of complexity, because really we're talking about complex adaptive programs and complex adaptive systems in the market systems approaches. So Donna mentioned earlier, she was talking a little bit about the balance between independence and collaboration, and how we strike that balance, and thinking about the context of the program that's being implemented. And I wanted to draw a bit from, I guess, either the grandfather of evaluation or the godfather of evaluation, depending on how you see him, Michael Quinn Patton, talking a little bit about different types of programs. So if we're talking about a simple program where there's high degree of certainty and a high degree of agreement on how the program should be implemented, like a vaccination program, we understand how to deliver that program. It's really about high fidelity to the delivery of that intervention. And then summative evaluation is really appropriate. And here we're thinking much more about the independence of an evaluation team to make sure that that program is implementing that the way it should be. When there's far from certainty on what we should be doing and what the solution looks like, or far from agreement on what it looks like, we're talking about a complicated program. And here, independence is important, but you might want a little more collaboration from the evaluation side of things. When we're in the zone of complexity, which is what we're talking about here, we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to get there. We just know what we'd like at the end. Here, collaboration is really important. The evaluation has a role that they can play in helping us kind of navigate this complicated field that we're trying to do. So when we're talking about accountability and learning, independence and collaboration, I think understanding the nature of the program that's being implemented is a real important consideration in that debate. I'm going to talk a little bit about a market systems program called Pepe, Private Enterprise Program Ethiopia, that's being implemented in Ethiopia, that we're the evaluation team for. So I wanted to start off by thinking about, for this market systems program, the universe of measurement that we're trying to look at for systemic change in a facilitation program, and thinking a little bit about the balance between monitoring and evaluation on that program. So we're doing an intervention, the program's doing an intervention, they're thinking about some sort of innovation, a new business model that they could be implementing, and the ultimate goal is for this enterprise or this firm to change practice, to do something differently. And that's what they're trying to look at. And that change in practice should lead to a change in performance in terms of increased productivity, capacity utilization, and then ultimately profits. And that change in practice is typically delivering, so you're setting up a partnership here. That change in practice is ultimately delivering some sort of new product or good or service that's meant to reach somebody. That's going to help them change their economic practice, so using improved seeds because they have access now, or fertilizer or whatever. That should change their performance in terms of the productivity, and you should hopefully see that translating to increased income, and ultimately you'd like to see that improved well-being. So how is that income being used? If it's just at the end of the planting season, the farmer can gamble more or drink more beer, then it's not really leading to that social good that ultimately we're trying to get at. So now we're looking at a whole other area of measurement around the beneficiary impact. When beneficiaries access that good and service, what's that results chain or that causal impact pathway look like? But of course, when we're working on market systems programs, we're not always dealing with the direct partnership leading to that good and services. We've got intermediaries here as well. So we might be delivering a new good and service to an intermediary partner who also needs to change practice. They'll see a change in performance, and then they're delivering the good and services. So we're several steps removed in some ways from where we're trying to get to. And then what we'd like to see is systemic change. We'd like to see other systems actors replicating, responding, and expanding to these new business models that are delivering new goods and services that are changing practice all through the system. So we have this whole system here of all of these people who need to be changing and doing things differently, and we want to see how ultimately that's benefiting the target populations that we're trying to reach with this program. So if you kind of see this as the universe of measurement, this kind of provides a good and useful map at the beginning of a program to help the evaluators and the program understand who could be doing what. So we have different needs, and we need to match our skills to the measurement questions. Implementers are better suited to measurement, which is answering their day-to-day questions, because especially in these types of programs, they're trying to do adaptive management and learning. So their data needs are really what's going to help them make their decisions on a day-to-day basis. How will I know if my intervention's working, if I need to change course, what do I need to do? And of course, there's a accountability purpose here, so a program log frame and the monitoring and reporting that they need to do for the accountability here. Evaluators have a different skill set. We're hired for, we're social scientists, anthropologists, economists, different people coming in. We're better suited to answering the different types of questions. And again, these aren't exactly the questions that you might see in the log frame. These are more broader questions around relevance, coherence, sustainability, impact, etc. So more suited to be looking at things ex post, because these things take a long time, and also sort of the systemic change and the wider program learning that's happening. So it's about matching up the skill sets between what the program needs and should and can do, and what the evaluators need and should and can do. On Pepe, the program that we're implementing, DAI is implementing and we're evaluating, they're following the DCD standard. The DCD standard, when a program aims to achieve that, is ensuring a robust program results measurement system. So from intervention to impact and all of the steps in the way, and if a program goes as far as to be compliant and then get a DCD audit, it can provide high degree of certainty for an evaluator that the direct partnerships leading to the partnerships intermediaries to the beneficiary impact has a robust data set that you could be using for evaluation purposes. Because just a step back, when we're talking about monitoring and evaluation, often we're saying M&E, 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 like it's one word, but it is monitoring and evaluation, and you can't do a good evaluation if you don't have good monitoring data. So as an evaluator, you're really concerned with the robustness and quality of the data that's coming out of this routine monitoring system. And this really largely follows what a log frame looks like, because at the end of the day, a log frame is a management tool. It's about managing the performance of a program. And the DCD sets up a standard that helps a program construct an M&E system, like Maesa was talking about, that's going to be able to allow them to do that. But that program isn't suited to measure it all. They may have a sense of the types of systemic changes happening. They might have a sense or get a sniff that this other business model might start being picked up by another organization, or these other people are responding. But it's beyond their scope and beyond their capacity to start to actually measure what those changes are. That's where a useful place for the evaluators can come in. We can take a wider lens. We can take a wider scope than what a program's able to do, and we can actually help them truly understand the systemic changes that their program is achieving in a more rigorous manner, in quantitative and qualitative, than they might be able to achieve themselves. So the evaluators can help to answer questions on not only the systemic changes happening through the wider system that's been catalyzed by that program, but we can also help to get to a wider sense of beneficiary impact as well by doing more robust impact assessments that are covering the universe of firms as well, not just the direct firms that a program is implementing with. So just to talk a little bit about how this is working on Pepe, Pepe is implementing a DCD standard. It's DCD compliant MRM system, which means that they're setting up all of the results chains and all the rest of it, and they have the auditors coming in. So during the annual reviews of the program, you can come in and look at the robustness of the monitoring data, and we can try to trace those partnerships. What the evaluation is doing is trying to support the understanding of the system-wide change. So how we've designed the evaluation is that Pepe is working in 3 sectors. We've taken a census of every firm in all 3 of those sectors, so about 450 firms in cotton, textile, apparel, leather and livestock, and fruit and veg in Ethiopia. By repeat observations of these, of looking at the current practices and current performance of firms over time, as Pepe starts to introduce new innovations into the system, we'll be able to trace that innovation through the system. So we'll know from their DCED system that they started working with this firm first, and this firm changed practice, and they had a change in performance, and they'll be able to measure the direct impacts of that change in performance with their partners. What we'll be able to track over time is how that innovation has cascaded through the system. Are other ginneries doing that differently? Are other tanneries doing differently? Are other garment factories doing things differently as well? And what's been the impact on their beneficiaries in terms of jobs and income, and be able to give a sense for Pepe of what have been those indirect impacts that they wouldn't have been able to achieve themselves in their own program. Pepe is an innovative evaluation in that the program is 7 years long, the evaluation is 11 years long. So when I give my grandchildren the team leader position at the end of the evaluation, we'll be able to look 5 years ex post to truly understand the effectiveness, sustainability, and scale of the impact that Pepe has achieved in a different way, and to provide robust evidence on the true impact of that program. And it supports a better understanding in general of systemic change processes. So that was, I think, what I produced today to talk a little bit about the balance of monitoring and evaluation on a prospective evaluation. This is my contact details, and we were asked to give a tagline at the end, and this was my first boss. Always said, M&E is not the enemy, so just to, keep up the good fight. Thanks a lot.
So it's fantastic presentations, 3 presentations, quite varied. A lot of questions probably thrown up. Maybe we take a round of 2 or 3 questions and then put them to the panel.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry if this is a too techie question, but one of the things that's often said is that we can't really evaluate system change because because it's so hard to set up the kind of counterfactual. And I think that, Drew, you've sort of given a sense of how we might pick up over, the overspills, the systemic effects, the replication and so on for other firms apart from those that are touched. But that also seems to mean that therefore we will kind of lose any sense of a counterfactual. Have you got any ideas for balancing this this conundrum? of the spillover effects and the counterfactual.
Good afternoon. My name is Nefas Munyeche. I am the team leader for a project called Innovation for Agribusiness, which is being implemented by DAI together with a local consulting firm in Mozambique called Kawi. The project is being funded by SDC, the Swiss International Development for Cooperation and Development. And mine is not really a question. I mean, I wanted to just, quickly, share a model that we are implementing as well as a project, to highlight how we are collaborating with some of the evaluators that are supporting the project. So we started an impact evaluation last year, which is being, implemented by IFPRI, the International, Food Policy Research Institute. They are based in Washington, so quite far away from Mozambique. And, when I look back at how we started, there was a round table discussion, to discuss the scope of the impact evaluation. It was a heated, discussion. And I realize now that, the heat was mainly coming from, some perceptions, that we had. First of all, I mean, a lot of my project colleagues, we were looking at IFPRI and we were saying these are PhD holders who are now coming to tell us how to implement our project. What sort of information do they want and how are they going to use, this information? But on their part as well, I realized that they really did not really understand, the market systems development approach. How we define ourselves as facilitators and how we work with the private sector companies that, we are implementing our interventions with. But it was really good because at the end of the day, we found each other. We realized that it was important for us to establish, common ground. We got to a point where, we stopped looking at them as people who are coming to police our work. And I could also see that on their part, they were now developing a more attentive ear, to understand exactly how we were implementing the project. So we eventually signed what we called, a monitoring for results, partnership agreement. It's a collaboration agreement, which basically states the roles and responsibilities of all the parties, that will be involved in the impact evaluation. And I thought that was really important because it clearly spelled out who would do what, when, and why. The timelines also for, the different, M&E activities were also stated within that, document. So it provided a very good, planning tool, to get a clear scope of what to expect. So once we signed the collaboration agreement, we have now also started monthly Skype discussions. Monthly Skype discussions, basically we use these Skype meetings to share information from the project of developments that are happening on the ground, what new information is coming up that could potentially maybe, disrail, the impact evaluation strategy. And from their part also, if they've got any new information that they want to share with us as a project, it's a very good platform, for sharing, that information. So that way, they remain engaged, they fully understand the work that is happening on the ground, but it has also allowed us to build social capital. Because now we really trust each other. And, I get a sense that they now understand why we are doing this and not the other way around. But there are times also when conflicts arise. There are times when conflicts arise. And one of the things that I've realized is that it's important to have within the coordination framework a neutral voice that then allows you to come and find common ground. And, Horacio, who is here, from SDC, he has been, the independent voice, when conflicts arise, he brings us together, to find common ground. So I thought, I could basically maybe share with you, the experience that we are having, emphasizing the importance of communication, the importance of trust, the importance of having clear roles and responsibilities, and also the importance of having some form of neutral voice that can help you to find each other when conflicts arise or disagreements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I feel we should maybe tackle Patricia's question first before we forget all about it, and then go to Zeynep at the back. So counterfactual in Ethiopia.
Yeah, to speak loud. I mean, it's a good question and something we've been debating a bit because you said the problem of the spillover effects is the issue, and it's true, but in some ways, actually, the evaluation is designed only to capture the spillover effects. That's actually what we care about. The program is looking at the direct effects through their interventions. We want to know what the spillovers are. How we're planning on dealing with that is taking more of a pipeline approach. So because every firm is different, and obviously there's self-selection factors, so the unobservables are really important here, using a firm as a unit of analysis. So what we're thinking about using is sort of the way that the innovation cascades through the system, thinking about sort of firms in a before and after and with or without treatment type scenario, possibly using some sort of propensity score to try to get firms more or less matched up, but to look at the variations in exposure, intensity, and duration of the intervention as a way to try to isolate the impact. We're also starting to discuss with the program if for some of their interventions might lend themselves to some degree of randomization in terms of different types of implementation, so different types of treatments that might be delivered, and could we randomize some of these interventions as well to get a sense of isolating beneficiary impact in different scenarios. So that's currently the strategy.
My name is Pepe. I work for evaluators based in Switzerland. Great presentations, but usually what I struggle is the evidence after a project is completed. It's not directed to you, but maybe to the participants also. Do we have evidence after a completion of a project proving sustainability and the scale? The usual answer that I hear is donors are not interested, implementers are not interested because there is no resource. But I say to people who reply that way that if you have a program that's running for 8 years, you have different interventions, as we go along. We phase out interventions and we look back at the interventions, whether those interventions are also leading to scale and sustainability. Do we have really the evidence? That's the first question. Second question is, the projects that you talked about are, I assume, with larger budget, and longer time frame. But how about for projects with, limited, budget, small scale projects, Can these be applied? Or do we have to think about right-sizing monitoring and evaluation systems?
Okay, maybe we take one more, and I think sticking as much as we can with the theme of what's the relationship between monitoring and evaluation, as Drew pointed out. They're usually M&E, but it's like two different things.
Thank you for very nice presentations. I have a question. Maybe I missed this information, sorry. So you evaluated a lot of projects. I want to see what's the sheer percentage of MSD project or M4P projects you have evaluated, or maybe number of MSD projects you have evaluated. Because as I understood, it's like a direct delivery projects and all other approaches you have evaluated, yeah? Or it's only MSD, this evaluation you've done?
What I did was I looked at the procurement tenders for evaluation services for just over a year, and there was 35 program-related tenders. So that was for M4P programs, for private sector development and everything else. And about half of those, so I think there was 17 out of 35, had evaluations. The contract was for a period of 3 years or longer. And I took that as an indication that there was this side-by-side sort of ongoing relationship, as opposed to the evaluations come in and the evaluation team is there for, a couple of months or something, and then they go away and they never sort of see or interact with the program again. So it was not evaluations actually done. And in terms of the number of those evaluation tenders that looked at involved M4P programs. I didn't count.
No, I think you brought up some good questions, and just talking about the diff tenders, I have seen more and more of these evaluations do have ex post components that are going 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years after the intervention, explicitly to look at the sustainability and scale once the program has closed down. So I think DFID is certainly leading the pack, and I hope that other donors will follow their lead in thinking about the importance of going beyond just the project cycle, because if we're honest, these changes take time. It takes 4 or 5 years sometimes before you're going to be able to pick up a change in practice, never mind what that leads to further down the road. And, thinking about trying to measure changes in production over one planting season, there's too many measurement errors that are involved in there. So we have to be thinking over longer time horizons. We chatted yesterday about what to do on the smaller and medium-sized programs, and I think, we do have to think about, even including with the DCD standard, how far is a program realistically able to go, and it's not about kind of what's good enough types of methodologies to get to the top, like an income increase, but really is a program able to reliably measure that, and should we be using that as valid evidence, and how far down? I come from a health background, so if I'm doing a public health program in HIV prevention, we wouldn't try to measure HIV incidence from each intervention over a long time horizon. We might measure changes in condom use, and then we have models that we can use to kind of model what a change in behavior at that level looks like further up the impact pathway. And I think that we could do from thinking a little bit more about thinking about changes in farmer practice, and how could we think about the estimators or modeling further down the line. But those are some areas for further debate and discussion.
I just want to add on the post assessment and the involvement of evaluators. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. Why am I saying this? Is because looking at how DFID, for example, has been engaging these evaluators, you notice that they're giving in different contracts. But from some of the programs, you notice that the contracts include the entire program period, but also a few years down the line to the contract of the evaluators. This is in sharp contrast to how other traditional programs are evaluated, where you would only have maybe an evaluator coming in the middle of the program to do a mid-term evaluation, where they make all these type of recommendations that have a different direction and perspective to the program, which I think has not been the most effective way of assessing programs. So I think there is more hope. I should say there is more hope. What is required, I think, is for practitioners, the evaluators, to make a case of why this is significant. Because as you were saying, systemic change sometimes cannot even happen during the program period. It might happen maybe a few years down the line. And if you don't assess that, if you don't capture that, who is going to capture it and make a case out of it? Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add one more thing about the level of evaluation or whatever for smaller programs? So smaller programs, people normally sort of think in budget terms. But I think there's more than just looking at sort of budget. I mean, monitoring and evaluation needs to be proportionate, but it also needs to factor in, well, what type of program is it? So Drew made the difference between simple, complicated and complex programs. So if you've got a simple program that's got a well-tested logic that is known to work in particular situations for particular target groups and that, then monitoring and evaluation, if I put them together, could be lighter. But if you've got a new program, you're really testing a new approach, you're not really sort of certain, then there's more information needed to really sort of understand what's happening, etc.
I'm Rita. I manage a USAID Feed the Future Ag Inputs project in Uganda. And one of the components had a pre-built-in separate monitoring evaluation component, and that was specifically for an intervention that we were expected to introduce, which was e-verification on agro inputs. And this is an IFPRI contract. And I came into the project in year 3 of a 5-year project, by which time the e-verification had not yet taken off, because of various roadblocks and relationships in the way. And it basically set up almost an adversarial relationship between the activity, which was struggling to try to get an intervention off the ground, and the evaluator who's coming in and complaining, well, we did our baseline and we were supposed to be doing the end evaluation, the midterm evaluation, and nothing's happened yet. And we've got all this data that we need to collect and you don't have any impacts. And so, I mean, it was, and there was no communication on the decision making, the you know, it wasn't built into the ongoing monitoring and helping us identify solutions. It was just an outside measurement stick waiting. That's one example. I think we've finally gotten it up and started, and we've developed a better relationship because they see a light at the end of the tunnel. There's something they're going to be able to measure. But it's not exactly the most constructive relationship. I've also been a key informant for a number of other activities that are just getting off the ground, DFID funded, and their evaluators come around and do all these in-depth interviews with us as potential stakeholders and potential collaborators. And it's frustrating for the key stakeholder because you're pitching all these wonderful areas of potential collaboration and have no idea whether this evaluation team is going to have any input to the actual implementation team in terms of making recommendations for future relationships and interventions. So I'm just throwing into the mix those two separate kinds of examples which address a bit this question of balance.
They do. Bill, you're right there.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Jim. Bill Grant from DAI. A couple of questions. One, you know, I really agree that, you know, M&E is not the enemy. You know, if done right, and you've raised some of the concerns about how do you engage, and Nefas gave a great example of, I mean, it was really contentious for the first month of discussions when IFPRI said, no, your beneficiaries may not go into that province to work. It's like, but we can't control our beneficiaries. And we've been, you know, they can go wherever they want. That's a market system. That's a market system. But no, you can't, because we can't have the counterfactual. But we worked it out with the help of our neutral, the person who was hiring both sides, who said, you guys will work it out. The job of the donor. But Miyaso, just if you could just perhaps give a couple of examples or your reflections. Have there been cases where the evaluators have seen things that you didn't see that you were doing, and raised them and actually became an advocate for, wow, you're having more impact than you thought, or here's some changes that are picking up speed. You guys should be kind of building off of them and communicating that to the client so that the client hears it. Drew, just a question. You know, I think market systems development we have the donut, and it has the top half and the bottom half. And 95% of our activities tend to focus on the top half. And the things you described, I know the examples very well, and they are, you know, they're all top half. But what about the bottom half, the regulatory environment? And I guess, you know, you can have a partnership with the regulatory body to get them to change their behavior. But have you had any examples of the regulatory side and seeing how they've changed and some of the impact from that? Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly reflect on two of the questions that were raised earlier. First of all, what about small organizations and small programs? In my experience, some of these programs are also pretty complex, but the scale and the scope of the theory of changes is generally a little bit smaller. So obviously also the scale and the scope of the evaluation or the monitoring initiatives will be smaller. You still can use the kind of systemic approach that our friend is using, which I find very interesting, very similar in some aspects as the Piala stuff. So I just wanted to make that observation. I'm currently involved in an effectiveness review of Oxfam GB's work in Myanmar on the dry zone, which is about inclusive governance and voice to improve livelihoods in the dry zone. And it's a quite simple theory of change, but the scope is smaller, but it's pretty complex. So, okay. Another thing regarding counterfactual analysis, doing the kind of systemic approach where you look for systemic heterogeneity and using that as the basis for a different type of counterfactual analysis, configurational counterfactual analysis, enables you to do that kind of data collection and analysis, feeding back into program management and improvement and learning during the course of the program, as well as at the end, building an evidence base that is sufficiently rigorous to make a case of contribution to systemic change of the program. And I'm happy to give you more detailed information about that, but I think it's an important point that should be made.
Just introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Adinda. I'm Van Himmerijk, and I'm an independent consultant, and I've been involved in the design and the piloting of an innovative impact assessment and participatory impact assessment and learning approach for IFAD with co-funding of the Gates Foundation.
All right, a couple of questions, I think, but I think there was one that was specific directed to me. I think my colleague here would like to know if there are any specific cases that our relationship has flagged out some issues to the program. I would like to make this as participative as possible. As I indicated, we have one of the evaluators here, so we want to give him a chance. But just to mention that they submitted their Wave 1 report to DFID, where there are issues there which have been flagged out. But I think he might be able to explain also from the evaluator's point of view. And if my team leader also has something to share, he might also share. They are both at the back. Yeah.
I just want to come back to Rita and your first sort of comment about the relationship with evaluators, and sort of sometimes evaluators can be, just driven on, they're in a plan, they've got a contract, they're supposed to do this evaluation, and sort of and come back to earlier points that it is about communication and negotiation and things. I think it's also sort of interesting sometimes, and there's a few different organisations that have come up with sort of coined terms about evaluation-led monitoring or impact-led monitoring, sort of indicating that the benefit is one way. Monitoring is there to benefit evaluation. But in fact, I think when there's, particularly in that sort of sense of sort of the big E evaluations of a baseline, midline, endline, and evaluators are only coming in periodically, and they might have a set of questions that are developed right at the start of a program, is that the monitoring and the implementation team can also provide a check and a balance around the relevance and the importance of those questions, or maybe things have changed and there's new questions that also need to be sort of asked. So I think it is a two-way sort of thing, and but comes back to the trust and the communication as well between programs and evaluation teams.
Thanks. I'll try to respond to your comment, Bill, but thanks for that. I think it's a really important point, and in some ways on these market systems programs, the bottom half of the donut can be the most important and certainly the most impactful, oftentimes not in the life cycle of a program. So, not to use Pepe as an example, but I just did an annual review of a M4P program in the DRC, and they're fiddling about in Eastern Congo with a lot of little small supporting functions that are going to help coffee farmers, and they're getting the numbers that they need for their log frame reporting on an annual basis and all the rest of it. But there's also another team that's kind of lobbying to change the import law around coffee exports, and the export law around coffee exports to make them more competitive. That's going to be a 3, 4, 5 year long haul. But if they do that, that will certainly benefit more coffee farmers in Eastern Congo than any of these input supply type models that they're working on. So I think we need more of a recognition of, you know, in some ways these programs do have to work like a governance program, and sort of taking more of a political economy lens to it for sure. How we're trying to deal with that on the Pepe evaluation, I think the donut is extremely useful for kind of diagnosing sort of all of the different, you know, actors involved in a transaction. Before David Elliott comes and punches me, I will say I don't think the donut is extremely useful to serve as an evaluation framework, and that's why we've been leaning a lot on kind of Quinn Patton's work around thinking about actors in a system and how they relate. So in some ways, you might think about the actors involved in the bottom of the donut. That actually impacts the people, the actors that are involved in the top of the donut before you get there, if you will. So by looking at firms as a unit of analysis, looking at time for export, how long things are sitting at customs for importing things. You can think about all of the different policy constraints that a firm is facing, and then looking over time through the lens of a firm, you might see how the alleviation of some of those constraints changes their performance, might allow them to be more productive, and then how that sort of cascades down to a beneficiary level. So I think it's about understanding the pathway by which a policy impacts and then tracing that out through the evaluation. But certainly I think that there needs to be more of a focus on that. And actually we had a success on Pepe in getting the bottom of the donut in the log frame as well, recognizing the importance with DFID that they need to be focusing on the rules of the game as well if Pepe is actually going to achieve impact at scale. And that's something that we revised in the last annual review, which is great.
I'm Gordon. I'm team leader of the evaluation of Ghana Made, and I just want to point out that this is a very practical example of a level of trust and communication between the program and the evaluator. Bill, your question was, do we pick up anything that the program doesn't pick up and then communicate that to the donor? In Ghana Made's case, we're doing a theory-based evaluation, so we're not looking at things like impact. Although that obviously influences the areas that we look at in terms of the theory. The other qualifier is, of course, that with all evaluations, there's always a bit of a time lag. So generally what happens is, of course, the programs are reporting on a quarterly basis, and the donor is well aware of how the program is reporting their performance. And as the evaluator, with that bit of time lag, we're sometimes looking a little bit retrospectively before we start commenting on performance. I also think that sometimes we're looking at things that are different to what the program is looking for. So the program might be looking, for instance, at specific numbers, whereas we'll be asking different questions like what or how did you manage to achieve those numbers, rather than what numbers did you manage to achieve. So I think in some cases we do report things that the program has not looked for, and as a result they have not reported on. And as a result of that, we may show a different side to the program's performance that the donor than the program is reporting on to the donor. So I know that's a bit of an evasive answer. It's not a direct answer to your question, but yeah.
Thank you. Definite maybe. Did you don't want to?
No, just thank him. That's all. Thank you.
Peter, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a quick comment and I have a question. The quick comment is there was also an evaluation of Catalyst 10 years ago. It was like £750,000 at that time, and it was a complete disaster for the reasons that were mentioned here. They've mentioned the wrong baselines in markets we finally didn't work in and things like that. But my real question is, what is the commitment of, in this kind of DFID, what to do with these evaluations? Because it looks like overall friendly, but if there is at the end a kind of a punishment, let's say it like this, then it is not all friendly. I mean, we don't need to fool ourselves, and the incentives are different. So is there a real commitment to publish them and to draw conclusions like this managing contractor won't get a contract for the next 5 years or something like that? And a bit related to this is, and I'm sure a lot of us have been actually heard these stories first or second hand of evaluators who send back to rewrite it, you can't write this so negative because it's my project. So, yeah, that's a bit of a combined question. Yeah.
I thought I'd try and respond to Peter's question about what will we do with all of these evaluations. So, but I'll say a couple of other things first, if you don't mind, while I think about that one. So we, as Donna said, we're certainly commissioning, I think now, more evaluations. And on this question of sort of small programs, our view, DFID's position, is that we would rather have fewer, better evaluations than more from which we can't really draw good results. So, and I don't think that's related necessarily to the scale of the programme in any way. So I asked for independent evaluation of an innovative programme applying market systems development to the low-cost private education sector in Lagos. No one had done it before. The idea was controversial, So we really needed, independent evaluation, and that the programme and the relationships have suffered, if you like, from having pushed it more to the independent end because it was such a controversial topic. That has made learning from it in programme a harder exercise, I think, than if we'd been able to sort of keep it under the same umbrella. But we were kind of really clear when we did that it was partly about kind of learning in programme, in this adaptive programme, and it was partly about contributing evidence about whether this system, this methodology can work in social sectors, which we didn't have any. So in that sense, we've been very transparent about our objectives all the way through. We have, if the programme is a failure, we won't lay that at the feet of the implementers. We knew we were taking a big risk. If the evaluation sort of isn't really looking at process, it won't really tell us whether the implementers did a bad job or not, really. So I suppose that maybe for process evaluations, we're sort of looking at how things are managed, then those questions come in. I think when we're really trying to do sort of theory-based evaluations or impact evaluations, I think we're pretty committed to publishing them, and we have the Research for Development website, which hosts everything that we, all of the research that we pay for. When things are done within a programme, I'm not sure, then they may get a little bit more lost from our control. But I hope that we're seeing all of these things coming onto the Beam website.
I think that it's an interesting point, Peter, because I remember that evaluation very well. And it was the first ever longitudinal 3-year impact evaluation, and the client told us what methodology to use. They said, we want an experimental randomized survey, which we said was not appropriate for that environment. The result was, at the end of the 3 years, the data came back inconclusive, that there was no evidence that there had been impact. And we could say that that's what the data showed. And DFID said, no, we can't have that. We think this is a successful program, therefore this evaluation cannot be published. And I finally had to go back to DFID and get a letter that said, you did exactly what we asked. We have no complaints with what you did. You did it exactly the way you were supposed to. You fulfilled your contract completely. They didn't say, it just didn't give us the answers we wanted because the methodology was chosen wrong to begin with. So I think it's really important to make sure you get the right methodology for the thing you're trying to evaluate.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Benson with TechnoServe. Donna, I was very struck by your comment that nobody learns more from an evaluation than the evaluators. And with that as a backdrop, I'm interested in asking about failure. So where you have found things didn't work the way you anticipated or the project anticipated that they would, or that there were unintended negative consequences. I guess a question for any of you who'd like to answer, if you have any particularly good examples of how that was brought into the light of day, shared, made use of, and then if you had your druthers, what kind of systematizing, if you will, of that learning about failures would you like to see happen?
Perhaps if I could add to that, there's a question I'm dying to ask, and it follows from that, which is, you could say there are at least 3 different kinds of failure. There's the failure where, the team did their fantastic job and we learned a huge amount and it just didn't work out and all good. There's the type where, acts of God, something completely random happened, overtaken by events, and it didn't work out. And there's a third type, which is, let's say, rank incompetence and really messed up. And as a taxpayer, I'm sort of keen that evaluators would pick up the third kind when it happens. And I just wanted to sort of put that to the panel, perhaps particularly to my essay, because you talked about evaluators supporting the implementers, and I wondered how far we can take this. Just putting it out there. Our friend from Mozambique, very interesting story about IFPRI getting to know the approach, really important. But after that, how close should people be?
Oh, thanks so much, Jim. I think in one of the slides I mentioned, or I emphasized the need for these evaluators to be involved in the M&D process as well. This kind of involvement is not random. They need to know how these M&D people are collecting their information, and at what stage can they be able to provide some guidance. I gave specific examples on, for example, we've been conducting baselines. We've also been doing some assessments. I mentioned on the need for the evaluator also to look at the tools, for example, that you are using. This kind of involvement allows the evaluator also to look at the methodology maybe that you are going to be using and how you are going to collect that information. Even going beyond that, when you've collected your information, they need to have access to the database when you've entered your information. They can use that information for their own purposes as well. So it helps you before you even make a mistake, which might be noted later. They can be able to advise you on how you should go about it, or on some specific questions that are relevant to them. In sharp contrast, I would also give you an example of another program that I worked in Malawi, MOST. I was sharing with my colleagues on how the evaluators were introduced. The project had implemented for 1.5 years. We didn't know that there would be any evaluators coming to the program until DFID sent an email. We are introducing this team as evaluators to your program. They will be coming, can you share your schedule? And so the team leader is assembling now the team. Oh, they have these people coming as evaluators. So the first question is, what are they going to be doing? What's their objectives? What's their TORs? So this kind of arrangement is different because these people are now coming not to serve the purpose of supporting the program or to get involved, but they are now coming like external people to review your program, which they are not even acquainted to. When they came, now they started asking some basic questions, which you would sit down and say, oh, okay. So if you don't know about this, how are you going to evaluate our program? So you see, that's I think some of the things I think that also need to be reflected from the donor's point of view. At what stage are these evaluators going to be engaged? For me, I would say if they're involved in all the processes, for example, right from the beginning, they understand the theory of change. They understand how your interventions have been shaping. I don't think we are going to have challenges at the end of the day because they are already acquainted with your theory, they are already acquainted with your process, and they have been involved at all the stages of the program. Yeah.
I think it's a really good question. I think something we all say we do all the time, and I think we struggle to do it really, really well. Certainly, I learned as an evaluator, if you come to somebody with a piece of evidence that that supports their paradigm or what they think is happening, then it's held up to the rafters and look at this, it's working. And when you show them something that it's not working, they just attack your methodology and then reject the results. So I think it's really important to be working with the program teams the way that we've been trying to do it, both internally at Playdom on our programs and then in an evaluation, is setting up sort of some dedicated spaces for reflection with project teams, and that's sort of like, whether that's a strategy review or whatever during the annual review time on a DFID program, whatever we want to call that, where we kind of look through the theories of change. We kind of identify, because really when we're talking about failure, we've got, like Jim said, there's 3 types of failure. Either it was designed poorly and that's why it's failing, or it was designed well, it was implemented poorly and that's why it's failing, or we didn't take context into account, so our critical assumptions were wrong and that's why we're failing. So, or they changed, exactly, and we didn't take that into account in our delivery. We didn't adapt to the delivery. So using a theories of change as kind of a model, during these strategy reviews, you can just kind of go through the steps and say, okay, do we have evidence that the cause is happening? Do we have evidence that the effect is happening? Do we have evidence that the causal link assumptions are being met? Do we have evidence that kind of links cause to effect? And if we can't say yes to any of those questions, then let's reflect on that a little bit and figure out why. What did we get wrong? And how can we change? So it's kind of not failing and sort of like pulling the plug, but just sort of like, what did we not think through well? And is there scope to adapt? And if there's not, then maybe we should fail. And that happened on Pepe in the last annual review with one intervention where it just, with a tomato processor and a cooperative group, and it seemed like incentives are aligned. It seemed like everybody was there. It just wasn't moving, and we just kind of sat down and just said, well, what were the motivations for these 2 parties for entering into this partnership? And things have changed now, and people are moving on, and really, let's just kind of pull the plug and then move on to another intervention. But it's a difficult process, but I think evaluators, specifically on prospective evaluations, really have a role, and Mayus and I were talking about this even before we started, to create those dedicated spaces for reflection, because that's when those kind of things happen, I think, in a productive and useful way.
And maybe if I can build on that, maybe with a different hat, on sort of a program that I was working on over in the past year as an internal evaluator, not only external. But there was one intervention that the program was heavily invested in, and a series of interventions that were quite similar, heavily invested in and had invested in for a long time. And there were some of us in the program, and including in the M&E team, that had a few questions about this. And so we collected the data, analysed all the data, and fed it back in a reflection session to the implementers. And it was interesting, and things were definitely not progressing as well as what people had thought that they were. And there was a lot of questions around sort of the assumptions that people were making about how they thought change would happen, and the progress and the speed of change, etc. And there was also, it was quite interesting because there was quite a difference of opinion, I guess, then amongst the implementation team of the people that had been involved in these interventions for a long time, who were much more likely to say, oh, we've spent too much money, we've spent too much time trying to do this, let's just cut it. And the ones that are more newer on the program are sort of saying, oh, well, let's give it a bit more time. We've sort of, we have changed things, we've still got to test it and things like that. So the program decision was to continue for a little bit longer, but it was sort of like the interventions, sort of these was sort of put on notice, I guess, that they had amount of time, so to sort of see whether they could turn things around sufficiently. It was also very useful, this internal exercise, because we had an external evaluation team come in a few months later, and we could at least demonstrate that we were interested in answering these questions. We were looking at things, we were trying to take action about that, so yeah.
Just to build on what the 2 last speakers have ended on, and also to pick up from where my colleague here got us all started on, which is the value of the independent evaluator. And I prefer to see the independent evaluators as internal auditors are not external auditors when we come to the corporate world. And they have unique value to add. And as Gordon pointed out, the program implementers are more interested in what has worked. They help us to unpack why it has worked, and sometimes more importantly, how it has worked. And when you bring that to bear also on the failures, then you get to understand not what has failed, why at all did it fail? And what is it that led to the failure? Was it, as you yourself, Jim pointed out, is it that the implementation team got it wrong? Was it that the assumptions were out of whack? Was the context the issue? So unpacking all these as implementers, you don't have the luxury of time to do all this. So you need this second pair of eyes. And even in our own personal lives, I go to a doctor and he says, your eye is not seeing well. I don't jump to the conclusion that actually my eye is bad. I go for a second opinion. And sometimes I go to a specialist. So that's the value that they add. So when we say independence, let's not assume it's this guy policeman who is coming in to watch over me. No. It's just helping you to validate, verify, validate, and bring a lot more credibility to bear on your results.
That's a very articulate and appropriate closing comment. Unless the panel would like to say anything more. No, we've summed it up. Well done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you particularly to the panel for a very, very interesting session.